We know that when we get people right, we get business right. So I'd like to welcome you back to my podcast that focuses on 3 areas I specialise in: leadership, performance, and culture. You'll hear my guests talking about their experiences and expertise, and will be providing thought-provoking insights around putting the human factor back into business. Each conversation will be accompanied by a free downloadable guide to save the strain on your memory, and resources that will make it easier to put the great ideas we discuss into action. I'm your host, Lisa, psychologist, psychotherapist, and founder of It's Time for Change, and I thrive on conversations that make a difference. So reach out to me. My details are in the show notes along with the resources. Grab a cuppa, sit back, and enjoy. So many organisations are talking about skills gaps right now, but what if the problem isn't just a shortage of skills? What if it's about how we think about capability in the first place? Today's conversation is about moving beyond short-term recruitment fixes and looking at the bigger system, how organisations, education, communities, and leadership all shape the pipeline of future talent. Because skills gaps don't appear overnight, they're built or prevented over time. I'm joined by Charlotte Harris from Nicholsons, a long-established family-run environmental and landscaping business with sustainability and long-term stewardship at its core. And Charlotte brings a systems perspective to this conversation, thinking not just about who we hire next, but how we grow interest, develop potential, and build leadership capability for the long game. So welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. So let's start here. When organisations talk about skills gaps, what do you think often gets missed?
Oh, you start with the tricky questions first.
Right
Thank
in.
you. I wonder if we start kind of above organisation level to start with and think industry. So as you mentioned on the introduction, we as Nicholsons are in the green sector. So we're landscapes, forestry and ecology. And it's a very real thing, the shortage of skills in that sector. And we feel it very closely, and especially with recruiting more senior and experienced positions. It has been a real challenge, and we've read many different articles and things, and we feel like that's received widely across the industry as well. But as a company, we're real keen advocates for training from within. So we're really passionate about recruiting individuals that have perhaps come from a completely different industry, or perhaps they've come from a slightly related industry, they've maybe come out of school or anything in between. And we're keen to grow them from within. So we're really passionate about supporting things like apprenticeships or industry placements, so balancing formal study with direct traineeship as well. And that can look like a whole different range of things. But the skills gap within the green sector in particular looks like a lack of skills amongst the likes of horticulturalists, landscape designers, technicians, so those that are operating our computer-aided design or do our mapping work for us. Our skilled contracting team, so those that are going out and building our wonderful gardens, and our garden management team as well. So our brilliant team of gardeners that are going out there and delivering on that work as well. All the way through to really specialist roles like foresters and arboriculturalists that are assessing tree health. We've got a huge range of talent in our industry, but it has been very, very difficult to recruit. So linking kind of industry big picture to us as an organisation, we're fairly recently employee owned. We became employee owned just before Christmas, and we really believe in the importance of diverse backgrounds and experiences, and including transferable skills that anybody can bring to the table from completely different industries and experiences before. That said, we do need to balance that with recruiting talented individuals and making sure that we've got that balance of really experienced team members and then those that are up and coming and that can learn from them as well. At an organisational level, things that often get missed when referring to skills gaps is the likes of, in our industry in particular, it's very common to have an ageing workforce. So all of that knowledge, that skill, that experience has kind of bundled up at the top end, if you like, of our generational pool, which means that we've got huge scope for bringing in newbies into the industry and teaching them all that there is to know about the green sector. Interestingly, in our company, actually 71% of the company are under 45.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's a real opportunity for us to make sure that we're bridging that gap that has typically been a thing with the ageing workforce and making sure that all of that knowledge is disseminated down across the generations, so that we don't have that gap as such.
Mm.
And I think the likes of Gen Z, and the younger generations in particular have had quite a bad rep in the workplace and quite negative connotations of what that can mean for organisations and working across departments. Often the conversations around struggling to get them in the office, or ability to collaborate with others. And there's lots of negativity that is attached to that generation, which I think is quite unfair. We've noticed in particular that with this huge opportunity for developing the younger part of our team comes with brilliant innovation, improved efficiencies. They're pragmatic, they want stability. They've grown up in a time when there's been immense change and disruption, and actually they want to come to work to do something meaningful. And they're particularly passionate about morals and values and ethos, and that's a real skill set that we can grab hold of and run with, especially at Nicholsons with what we do. Let's work to optimise that. We typically see young generations being more self-aware. There's so much out there, and especially with what we're doing at the moment, of knowledge share, and self-development and growth. And that's a huge thing amongst generations as well. They want to be better. So let's grab hold of that and harness that as well. So they're keen to do meaningful work, they want to make an impact, they're confident in challenging the status quo a lot of the time, which can be uncomfortable in certain situations, but actually how can we train them to do that in an effective and kind and constructive way? Because it comes with from a well-intentioned place. So let's make the most of that. But that said, if we are bringing in these younger generations into the workplace, are we making sure that they're fairly represented amongst the likes of different committee boards and groups that you might have among the organisation? So, are they having their say through feedback opportunities? Are they buddied up with someone of a different generation so that you can optimise on that intergenerational working? What you don't want to have is all of the youngsters grouping together, all of, and everything in between and working in silos again. Whenever we have a new starter join us at Nicholsons, we have this buddy system, and part of that is making sure they're teed up with somebody that they can learn from and grow from, and that's two-way. That's not always someone that's been here forever showing them the entirety of the ropes and expecting them to soak it up. It's a two-way dialogue there. So that's, sorry, a very long-winded way of saying actually it's not always a gap, it's a strength, and how can we optimize that to have the best outcomes for the company. The second one I suggest that gets missed quite a lot is diversity and inclusion. There's been a huge push on this in recent years, and putting it at the forefront of company strategy. And anyone that runs a business will know that with that comes great benefits. I mean, diversity is huge, and where do you even begin to start talking about it? But inclusion in particular is so important to make sure that people can bring their best selves to work. And I think from a neurodiversity perspective in particular, organisations can look at that in quite a siloed way. So how can I equip this individual with strategies and better ways of working to help them on a personal level? But actually, good neuro inclusion is just really good workplace design. So a lot of the strategies, if you're researching into the likes of dyslexia, autism, or anything on the whole breadth of that neurodiversity can bring, many of those strategies which cross over in all of those different forms of diversity are actually really beneficial to everybody. So if we are more concise in our communication, speak in plain English, have clearly defined roles and responsibilities, we use assistive technology to benefit our efficiencies and remove barriers to working, that's going to benefit everybody. And I think drawing on that on a pan-company level to boost everybody's capabilities can only be a good thing. And of course, there are really nuanced situations where an individual will need something that's really specific to them, and that's not to undermine that at all. But I think considering diversity and inclusion at a whole level rather than on an individual level is really, really important. The third and final thing, sorry, I've got a lot on this question, is um, the role and importance of people managers. So I read a really interesting statistic the other week. I think this came from CIPD, which said that 52% of people working today don't see management as an aspirational career path for them,
Mm,
and they're actively seeking to avoid it. Now, that's a huge problem that we've got on our hands in terms of a skills gap. And we need to really reframe what it means, I think, to be a people manager and the opportunities that can bring, as well as, the inevitable challenges that can come with that. I think one of the misconceptions is that managers need to know the answers to absolutely everything. And if you've got a problem, you go to them, they'll tell you the answer, they'll solve all of your problems, and particularly the challenging and awkward ones that you don't want to tackle yourself.
mm,
And I think we need to kind of flip that narrative on its head a little bit. And it's not the responsibility of the manager to solve everyone's problems and be everything to everybody and be tangled up in all of their priorities that they need to try and figure out as part of their role. And it's actually around facilitating the success of others.
mm.
So showing them how they can come to a conclusion on their own accord, rather than immediately giving them the answer. So that, of course, that means leading by example and setting the strategic priorities and the goals and the targets. But that's also the really important skill of coaching and mentoring. And I often think that the success of a really good manager is what happens when you're not there. So if you go away on holiday or you're on sick leave, or we do people management meetings on a quarterly basis at Nicholsons, and if all of the people managers are in one room, what are the rest of the team doing when those managers aren't there? Are they acting professionally and behaving in a way that we would hope them to when no one's watching? Are they empowered to make decisions when you're not there? Do they understand their breadth of risk that they can take and when to defer it to somebody else? And I think flipping that narrative on its head and really showing the opportunities of being a people manager in enabling the success of others, who wouldn't want to be involved in that if that's how you sell it? But if we see negative examples of that, that's not going to be a good role model for all of our up and comings, our 52% that are actively avoiding being a people manager. And people, I think, often become accidental managers. So you typically become good at your job. There you go, there's your promotion. You've hit the nail on the head, you're excellent in your field. You now inherit a team of five, and you now need to be responsible for their performance, their conduct, their
Mm.
everything in between, their ability to meet targets. And I think coaching and mentoring is super important in terms of training that skill in others. I think it affects everybody far beyond your immediate team and department.
Charlotte, you have covered so many points there. My head is
Sorry.
like, no, no, no. I'm just like, that's a great point. I want to pick up on that. I want to pick up on that. What you've just been talking about in terms of the management not being seen as aspirational, I've also come across that sort of statistic and have actually worked with organizations who realize the challenge that's having in their organization because they've got people retiring and no one wanting to take, fill those shoes.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, I was talking about it this morning because I'm speaking at an event about LSIPs in a couple of weeks' time with Thames Valley Chamber, and we're talking about leadership and management and what the skills they need. And what I'm talking about at that session is exactly what you've just said about how you facilitate other people. And I think your example of coaching and you describing delegation and all those sorts of skills are not necessarily skills that people intrinsically have. Is like we, as you refer to accidental managers, people don't necessarily know how to make good decisions and delegate and support others and not just to tell people what the answer is and to navigate change and all those sorts of skills that actually leaders and managers need now, but often aren't. But that's not the focus. And it's about making that the focus so that it empowers the rest of the workforce and reduces some of those gaps. So it's really good to hear you talk about that. So I was like, yes, brilliant. And I think also when you're talking about gaps right at the start, you talked about uh, being able to disseminate information to prevent gaps happening. And I think that's really key because, again, and I don't know if this is your experience, but when many organizations, so I don't know if you're aware of this from other organizations you might have worked in or have contact with, but a lot of organizations will look at skills gaps and their solution will be, I need to recruit into that. And actually, as I need to recruit that skill that's missing, they don't step back and look at why is that gap there in the first place. And when we can work out why the gaps are there, you can then work out how to address those gaps and address those needs rather than
Mm.
just keep plugging. So it's really good to hear you make
Yeah,
that
it's
point.
expensive. Recruitment is so
Yeah.
expensive. And we hope, touch wood, that we get it right, because it has huge opportunity for us. But if it goes wrong, the time and the investment on both parties, from onboarding them, training, induction, the time investment, it's significant. And I think if you can spot areas in your ways of working, as I mentioned earlier, about general communication, what systems are we using? It sounds really boring stuff, but ultimately how people how they operate on a daily basis, using all of those systems and processes, the result is far more than the sum of their parts.
Yeah.
And I think if you can step back and have a look across the company and figure out where are the moments of excellence, attribute why are they going well.
Mm,
Is it because there's a brilliant people manager running that department? Is it because they've got an epic system that they're using? Is it because they prioritize training and development and applying that on a broader scale? Of course, if you need to recruit, you need to recruit, but that's not your only answer,
yeah.
as you mentioned.
And I think that is about then looking also at as you've said a number of times, the system. So
Mm.
rather than just looking at individual needs by team, department, whatever, it is stepping back and looking at the bigger picture. And I think you've highlighted that really well in terms of um, almost doing less. So doing less head down and just ploughing on and just scurrying around and being busy and just trying to fill the short-term gaps, to step back and have space to review and to actually look at why challenges are occurring, where the links are, and pulling all the right people in together to have a strategic approach rather than the obvious reaction, which is I've just got to sort out that problem as quickly as possible, which often is not the best way.
And again, realizing that it's not just you that needs to do that alone, kind of speaking about the trying to solve everyone's problems.
Mm,
If you ask the right questions and you're curious, and sometimes that's asking difficult questions,
yeah.
like how effectively is your line manager supported you in the last 3 months? Or do a review of our benefits package, or do a review of our systems. And we use quarterly reviews at Nicholsons across the company. So we've got regular touch points for line managers to speak to their teams, and we facilitate those questions for them. But of course, you can expand that as far and wide as you want to. But yeah, being strategic in your approach, asking questions and learning from others. We
Mm,
can't be in all places at once.
no.
We're a team now of almost 200 people across 3 offices, and we're a team of 5 in the people team. You can't know all things and be in all places at once, so you need to very carefully ask those questions, and ultimately, and really importantly, do something about it when you find out the answer. And it might be an answer that you don't want to hear,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's game changing for everybody and
Yeah.
the overall well-being of that department.
I've got more questions I want to ask you, but
Mm.
before I move on, I want to ask you, pick up on another thing you said, which I loved. It's about the fact you're talking about your lovely shout out to Gen Z, which is like brilliant, so well done. Um, but also you were then talking about how you train people to challenge the status quo, or you're talking about sort of Gen Z, like young people coming in, that's kind of expected that they will challenge the status quo, which is great practice. How are you training them to be able to do that? Like encouraging that practice, because that takes a huge amount of confidence to speak up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that statement saying that all Gen Z are confident is by no means a sweeping one. That's purely on the research that I was alluding to
Mm,
from previously. But
mm,
and I think it's not necessarily at a generational level, but it's for everybody in any role that you're in, whether you've been in the company for 2 minutes or you've been in the company for 25 years. It's about sharing your opinion in a kind and constructive way in the channels that are sensible to do that.
mm,
So, for example, on a daily basis, if you're seeing someone next to you working in a way that perhaps isn't the most efficient, you would say, have you considered, have you tried this, X, Y, and Z?
mm,
And 99% of the time, that will be greeted with someone that's grateful for the feedback.
mm,
And it's all about, it is about what you say and how you deliver it.
mm,
And if it comes from a well-intentioned place and isn't fueled by something else that's unhelpful. That's one of the things that we mentioned at Nicholsons is that we want to hear about everything you've got to say if you can say it in a constructive and solution thinking way. So that looks like a range of things through the quarterly reviews that I've just mentioned. So facilitating those questions for managers. So if they're not exactly confident in asking for those difficult questions, like how well have I supported you in the last 3 months, we can give them some prompts and guide them to ask the right questions. But we've got various channels for giving and receiving feedback, and I think those frameworks, and it's all about language, isn't it? Giving people the tools to say it in a kind and constructive way.
mm,
So it looks like many different things. That could be through formal training, or just calling someone out in the moment in a way that is supportive. Did you realise that you came across like that?
mm,
I know your intention was this, but how it was perceived was like this.
mm.
And I think it's about self-awareness more than anything else, and knowing how your words and your actions impact others. It's one of the main things we look for when we're hiring people. Are they self-aware and do they realise how they can positively impact, but also negatively impact others if that's channeled in a really unproductive way?
Yeah, I like that. And I like that focus in your recruitment.
Mm,
Because again, not necessarily everyone would think about that being a focus. They would think about your particular industry, um, and they forget the people side. And I think that's where more people, more organizations now are looking at those transferable skills and what we need in
yeah.
terms of being able to show up and engage and be part of a team and lead teams and so on. And that's what's the focus. Obviously, you've got to have the technical skills as well, but
Yeah, but a lot of those can be taught.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Skills and knowledge you can teach that to somebody, but often their inbuilt values, morals, how they treat others, that's a bit harder to teach. It is teachable,
Mm,
um, but it's a bit more challenging to do that. And I think if you're recruiting for the person from the outset,
mm,
um, with in balance with the skills and the knowledge and things that are also required for the role, but yeah, it's got to be the people first
mm.
approach in the
So
first instance.
I want to move on a little bit to think about sort of the bigger picture,
Mm,
because no organization works in isolation.
mm,
And I'm aware this is a really big question, and I'm aware that we're going to have to keep it on an our time because I've got lots of other things I want to ask you. But I'm curious to know how you think the relationship between organizations, education, industry bodies, and the wider economy works when it comes to future capability. Like, how does that or how do they connect?
mm. Um, Often they don't.
Yeah, exactly. I was
Um,
curious to know if you had a different experience.
I don't want to make a sweeping statement, but I think there is a disconnection at some level, and whether that's all the way across the chain or in a particular area of it, um, it's so important that we look outside our own priorities and strategies to figure out how it plays into the bigger picture.
Mm,
So, what are the government's targets in this area? What are the educational institutions doing about it? And how do us as a company, where do we sit in with all that? If we're all firing off different cylinders and trying to achieve different things, what on earth are we doing?
mm,
Because that's only going to cause more problems. But an example of excellence really is in the forestry sector in particular. So the UK government, forgive me, I don't know how much you're aware of this, have increased tree planting targets significantly over recent years. So much so it's like up to 30,000 hectares per year increase, which
wow.
looks like 100 million trees per year. So significant targets that we need to be achieving. And of course, it's all really good stuff and it plays into our wider impact of what we do as a company. So we're all behind it. And we've made great progress towards it, but we're by no means there yet. But surely by having targets like that, you've got to realise that there are only so many people and so
Yeah.
many organisations that are out there that can deliver this for you. So they need to do something else. And off the back of that, they created these government-backed apprenticeships specifically with a focus on forestry to improve the quality of education and the uptake of those apprenticeships to bridge that gap. You know, we need more people to deliver these targets. Here's how we're going to do it, and here's how we're going to incentivize companies to get on board with that. So, an example of that in particular, there's a one apprenticeship which is the professional forestry degree apprenticeship, 3 years. We're collaborating with the University of Cumbria on this one, but there are many other providers. And there's one brilliant chap who's in their third and final year of the course, and he's doing an absolutely brilliant job at that course. And I think is a great example of connectivity between government target, the educational provision, and how us as an organisation can come in and support that. And there are various incentives for companies to get on board with apprenticeships, whether you pay into the apprenticeship levy or other. There's lots of stuff out there. So that's a great example of connectivity in that bit. But almost kind of going back to the very beginning, how are we going to encourage young people to have an interest in that field in the first place? So,
Yes.
if as a nation and as a government we are trying to push more talent into this field, yes, they're coming from the universities and the colleges, but what's happening before that? And our more junior educational providers in primary school, secondary school, sixth form colleges, even the teaching of teachers, are they aware of these bigger targets and the impact, and how does the curriculum grow and evolve and change to support that? The Department for Education's got a huge part to play in the creation of that curriculum, teaching teachers, and how that learning is assessed. So, I mean, it's huge, and I don't by any means suggest that, you know, with this brilliant chap that we've got on our forestry team who's an apprentice, I don't think we've solved the world's problems in that scenario. But there's certainly more work to be done on putting your head above the parapet and being more assertive with schools and sending them an email, picking up the phone to them and saying, what are the challenges that you're facing at the moment? You know, whether that's at primary level, secondary school level, there's conversation around career development from like reception now in schools.
Mm.
And that all feeds into the trajectory of what that looks like going forward. But so, I mean, for us as a company, we've spotted that gap, and we support 3 forest school projects a year to create these green spaces to encourage children to develop a passion for the outdoors, because it starts there.
Yes.
That's the very beginning. A passion for the outdoors, an appreciation of nature, a willingness to be outdoors in all weathers. You know, all of these things are really important of
Mm.
whether you're going to become a forester later down the
Mm.
line. And I think it's important for organisations to have an awareness of that connectivity between all of those different bits and bobs. And if there is a gap, put your head above the parapet and try and do something about it.
You're giving
I
a really
mean,
good example of what uh, I was referring to earlier in terms of the local skills improvement plan,
mm,
the, the session in a couple of weeks' time. You're bringing to life brilliantly the gap between that I agree currently exists between many companies who are looking for skills, and then you've got education providers and you've got targets, and actually it's about getting all the right people together. And I think you've just created a lovely illustration of actually how when people work together, you can start right from the start of primary school and
yeah,
creating those aspirations. And you know, people talk about resilience, that was a really good example of you've got to be okay about being outdoors in all weather, and that starts from childhood. So
yeah.
it's such a lovely example to hear that the
Mm,
relationship that you've developed. What I'm also interested to hear a little bit about, and I'm just going to zoom back in because that's gone on a kind of broad scale.
yeah.
You talk about interest gaps as well as skills gaps. And I'm curious to know what you mean by that. So it's
Mm.
completely like zooming right down back from
Yeah,
coming
yeah.
to talk about big picture. What do you mean by interest gaps?
Um, I think the skills is one thing, but the interest and the passion's got to be there as well. And um, we've all heard that saying, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And
Yeah.
I think there's immense pressure on students to make the right decision from an early age about their future career. So from year nine, they need to know what GCSEs they're doing. From year seven, they need to have picked the right subjects. And I don't know about you, but I certainly didn't know what I wanted to do at that age.
No.
And even going into adulthood, it took me some time to figure that out too.
Mm,
And I think reducing the fear and the pressure amongst children about making that right choice and almost assuming that, well, once you've picked, you can't change your mind. That's
mm,
it for
mm,
life. And that's not real life. And when we go into careers fairs and speak to students, we're often met with a blank stare of, I have no idea, A, why I'm here at this event in the first place, and B, what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. I've got, even just sitting behind a desk, you can see in some children that they actually hate it.
mm,
Like they're not made to sit behind a desk and work at a computer and do that sort of work. But asking probing questions like, do you play football? Do you love PE? And it's do you love being outdoors in all weather? All of those sorts of things. You're opening their eyes to the idea that they can do something that they're interested in,
mm,
and that inevitably means that they're going to be good at it because the more you love something, the more time and energy that you'll put into it. And then from those conversations, you'll go from a student that's completely checked out in this whole process to someone that's actually going, well, actually, I think I can contribute to this really big, meaningful picture. We'll show them videos of our forestry team going out and planting a woodland, and over time, they'll see that grow and develop, and it's that connection with what they're doing being really meaningful, whilst also being able to be physical and practical and work with your hands and do something that you really enjoy doing. So
mm.
I think it's important to develop the skills, but also the interest, and that comes from teeny tiny when they're out building dens and playing in the mud and building bug hotels and everything in between. And I think the power of teachers and wider educational professionals, what they have, is a real opportunity to grow those interests from an early
Yeah.
age
That
that can build
really, it
something
really
exciting.
resonates with me. I love what you talked about, that whole it's about the interest and exposure to different opportunities for
Yeah,
people to realize what opportunities there are. Otherwise, we only know what we know,
yeah,
so that exposure is great. And I think also you touched on this about having a go at something and knowing that that is not then set in stone. So I'm a great fan of experimentation, and whether I'm working with groups of managers, leaders, whether I'm doing individual coaching, and people say, I don't know what I'm supposed to do in this space or
mm,
what's required of me. And it's like, well, have a go at this one thing. And if it doesn't feel right, it doesn't work out, for whatever reason, then you can try something else. You're not making a decision that that's it for long term. And I think people have such a mindset, well, maybe not the younger generations, but I think a lot of people have a mindset that is, this is how I'm supposed to operate in this world. I'm supposed to know what I want to do, and then I stick with it, and that is my life
yeah,
done. It's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I'm far
Tick.
from it. Yeah,
Yeah,
tick.
yeah.
And actually, often I'll see people later in life jump into completely different careers because, again, like we've referred to earlier on, it's transferable skills. So if you've got these transferable skills, you can be, a leader in this country, a company, a manager in that company, a team player in that company, and you can move to a completely different industry and learn the technical expertise you need. But you're the right fit for their culture, and you've got the right people skills. And as soon as you realize that, it's like, oh, actually, the whole world is my oyster, which actually can also be really overwhelming because it's like
Mm,
I've got nothing to narrow me down. But I
mm.
think it's a real mindset shift that's required.
Yeah, I think people are really frightened to make mistakes. There's a huge piece to do with resilience, and that comes from school level as well. About people having a go, not worrying about failing, and learning from mistakes and sharing it with others, almost celebrating, going, woohoo, look what mistake I made so that you don't have to make it. I think that's a huge part of learning and growing as
Mm,
an adult as well as being a child.
mm. I'm going to jump on, and
Mm.
there are so many other things I wanted to ask you, but I'm just really conscious of time, so we might have to come back and do a part two. Um, what I am curious to ask you about, and it's we sort of touched on it earlier, is about this leadership and management being seen as aspirational or not. Why do you think, and I don't know if it's from your research or your experience, why do you see fewer people finding those sorts of roles aspirational?
I think it depends on your own experience, and I think people's previous managers are hugely pivotal in someone's effect on whether they want to go and do that for themselves.
Mm,
It's quite difficult to kind of attribute, well, what exactly is it that makes a good people manager or a bad one? But you know when you see it and you
yeah.
know when you feel it. And I think people really draw on that as to informing their own decisions about whether that's the path that they want to take. And we talked about that stat earlier of 52% not seeing management as an aspirational path, but actually the impact that managers can have on well-being and productivity are huge. So that same study where I got that stat from, it was something like there's a 30% variance in productivity by individual depending on who line manages you.
Mm,
That's huge.
mm,
30% increase in productivity. And another one, which was something like 90 something percent of people say that having a supportive manager is really important to their overall job satisfaction. So pretty much everyone in the workplace attributes their whole satisfaction of their job to their line manager.
mm.
Again, huge.
Yeah.
So I think what you experience as an individual has a huge part to play in it, learning from others and what is a good example of one and what's a bad example of one. We've spoken about the accidental manager and having the correct skills and training to feel confident in being able to be a good people manager. But there's also a lot of different generations' experiences of what it means to be a manager as well. And I was recently at the Employee Ownership Association conference, and there was this brilliant lady called Henry Rose Lee. Do look into her if you haven't heard of her already. She was a brilliant speaker and expert in intergenerational differences in the workplace and how you can optimize on the good things that come with different generations and the negative things that sometimes come with it as well. And I mentioned earlier, there's no one size fits all approach. I'm not painting all generations with the same brush by any means, but there are some key things which are really, really interesting around world events and generations' upbringing that inform how they experience the workplace. So I was going to really quickly rattle through them and some of the key differences because I think this is interesting for your question on whether it's deemed to be aspirational or not. So starting with baby boomers, 62 to 80 years of age, born in the 1946 to 1964, grew up post World War II, so significant moment in time. Economic recovery, limited resources, really experienced quite hardship in their upbringing. But off the back of that meant that they typically value independence, autonomy, they're very work driven, very career focused. They value hierarchy as growing up in a period where strong institutions drove progress. So that's, you can imagine how that can play out in a management setting.
Mm,
So if that's what they've experienced, that's what they will be and expect
mm,
of other managers and leaders around them. So that can be a good thing, could be a bad thing. I'll let you
mm.
have a think about that one.
Yeah.
Gen X, so born 1965 to 1980, kind of 46 to 61 years of age, shaped by their independence, as from that period, there was a lot more parents going to work. So a
Mm,
lot of those children were left at home on their own, fending for themselves. And that generation also comes from families with the highest percentage of divorce, which is an interesting situation to play out.
mm.
So with that can come an increase in being more cynical because of that experience.
Yeah.
Hugely value autonomy again. They're motivated by pragmatism. There's a huge shift in analog to digital technologies. So they're extremely adaptable, comfortable with change, but they value results over process. So again, consider how that plays out in a
Yeah.
management and leadership
Yeah.
situation. Millennials, so age 30 to 45, huge rise in internet and global connectivity. They witnessed the 2008 financial crisis, which plays out in a desire for stability. They value fairness and they want to work for purpose-driven organizations. Great for us, right?
Yeah.
But what millennials expect out of their leaders is they want them to be more collaborative, they want them to be more coaching focused, and not command and control. So if they've experienced that from their line managers, they're having a huge shift away from that, and they're almost reinventing what it means to be a manager for themselves. They value ethical leadership and opportunities for growth. So again, really interesting. Gen Z, so the generation that we spoke about more recently, 14 to 29 years of age, born in a digital first world which shapes expectations of transparency and rapid communication. So
Mm,
that generation expect answers to things now, if
mm,
not yesterday,
mm,
and they want transparent communication. They want to hear it as it is. They grew up amid climate anxiety, global challenges. I'm sure you can think of one that comes to mind for one that most shaped their educational experience. They're acutely aware of mental health challenges
mm.
and how that informs their time at work. They want leaders who offer mentorship, psychological safety, and they expect that frequent, rapid feedback and communication. So I think it's a little bit of a side piece to what you were just saying there, but I think how people experience the world, their managers, and all of these extra kind of circumstances and contexts around the edges inform what they expect from their managers and
Mm.
their workplace, which is only becoming ever increasingly more demanding. People expect so much out of their companies they work for, their managers, and they often draw on the examples set from them previously, and then that will determine whether they believe that to be a good example or a bad example.
And it puts a huge amount of pressure on those managers to
Yeah.
know what is needed of them and to be able to understand those needs and be able to meet them. So knowing them was one thing, and I don't think many people understand, like, for example, in the depth that you've just that's an overview, but even that
Yeah.
would be insightful to a lot of people listening. But then what to do about that, like how to, inspire and coach and all those things that younger generations are looking for. That's a
Mm.
whole different skill set
Yeah.
to that a lot of managers have. And I think it really comes back to defining what a manager is, and for an organization to be able to communicate that clearly in terms of managers
Mm.
and leaders in our organization. What we
Yeah.
expect of them is this, and this is how we support them. So this is what we expect of you, and this is how what you can expect of us in terms of being an organization. This is the space we'll give you to be able to fulfill that role and develop it. Um, and I think, and it's about challenging also practice that's gone before. So going back to your earlier point about challenging the status quo. If management's always been done in this way or leadership's always been done in this way, to have someone new come in and saying, actually, I don't think that's the right way of doing it, I think
Mm.
actually we need to have be more about connection and support and coaching and enabling people to be their best selves. That can be quite a different look, very different to what has happened before, even within the
Mm.
same team or the same organization. So it's real clarity from the top around what a manager actually is and
Mm.
how that is developed and what people should expect from that.
Yeah, it's huge, and I think openness and self-awareness, as I mentioned previously, is really important because it's with all feedback, it's not necessarily a case of saying, "Oh yeah, great, okay, well let's do it that way." It's a dialogue, isn't it? And
Yeah.
there might be a reason why that is not the best way to do it, and that's when that person can give their context and their example of, well, actually, we tried that 6 months ago, and here's how it played out, and this is why we don't do it going forward. But at least that person feels valued and heard, and they've had an opportunity to have their say. But again, that two-way dialogue has to be done in a constructive and kind way so that people don't feel scared to do it again.
Yeah. So can I move on to a final question I want to ask you?
Mm.
So this is about going back to mindset, and we've already kind of touched on mindset a little bit, but if there's one mindset, Charlotte, a shift in that mindset that you'd like leaders to take away when they're thinking about future skills and capability, what would it be?
I think not being so hard on yourself as a leader and a manager to know the answers to everything, and be this person that is almost on a pedestal, and I'm here to deliver the vision, the mission, etc. And the expectation that you're supposed to have everything together at all times. And I think that openness to things actually being better without your input is actually quite a hard pill to swallow for some people.
Hmm.
And as I mentioned it earlier, around if you go away and your team thrive without you, that doesn't mean that you're rubbish as a leader and a manager. It means that you're doing a brilliant job.
Mm.
And you've got many different priorities and things to juggle and being pulled from pillar to post and lots of different demands and pressures. But if you can get to a place where your team feel empowered and confident to deliver without you, I think that's a really brilliant thing to celebrate, and an example of where you've done a good day's work
And it's
is
very
when you,
freeing, isn't it? Rather than
yeah,
being
yeah,
feeling like I'm kind of constrained by I've got to be with my team the whole time to make sure they're doing what they should be doing, and
yeah,
feeling kind of quite tied up. It's like actually I know I can leave my team and go and get on with things, and
mm,
that things will happen as well, if not better.
yeah,
Love that.
yeah, absolutely.
So what stands out for me from this conversation, because you have covered a huge amount, and there are the other things I wanted to ask, and we have just run out of time for, so we'll do that another time. But I think essentially it's that move from short-term fixes to the kind of the bigger picture, a longer-term strategic approach. And that skills gaps are really just about skills themselves. They're about visibility, interest, culture, and leadership. You have covered made so many good points today. We're going to put your contact details in the show notes. We'll put a couple of references to some things you've talked about in the show notes. But I want to say a massive thank you to everything you've contributed today, because it has been brilliant listening to you. Thank you so much for
Well,
that.
likewise, forgive me for rabbiting on. It's a huge topic and one that I'm hugely passionate about. So, no, thank you for steering it and keeping us to time as well. That's a great achievement.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
If you enjoyed listening to this conversation, there are 3 things I invite you to do. First, click the link in the show notes to download the resources for this episode. Secondly, help me extend the reach of this podcast by leaving a quick review on Apple or wherever you listen, and please share this episode with your colleagues so that you can discuss what resonates for your team. And finally, as usual, I invite you to reach out to me on LinkedIn or through my website so that we can keep the conversation flowing. I know listeners often say they're keen to implement some of the key takeaways, but find it tough without guidance or extra support. If that's you, drop me a line and let's chat. Be sure to check out itstimeforchange.co.uk, where you'll find a whole heap more to support you to reflect on and develop your own practice. And while you're there, join the Leadership Lens to stay up to date with bespoke support services like my retained partnerships, where I'm by your side through all things leadership, culture, and performance. Feel free to reach out if you want to know more. I'm a great sounding board for challenges and ideas for development, so grab all the details you need from the show notes. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you and to welcoming you to my next episode coming soon. Join me then.